Well, thank you so much, Christoph, for joining me today. Really excited to talk about an issue that, I follow for a while, and I think it's in kind of the back of everybody's mind, I think, and the sort of resource of water. It's kind of this thing we deal with every single day, and some people have a different emotion towards it, kind of where you live in the world. Maybe you have some good feelings about it, some bad feelings about it. But before we get into the state of water as we see now, tell us about your journey before Charity Water.
Yeah, great. It's great to be with you today. Thanks for having me on. I am currently working at Charity Water. I'm the Chief Global Water Officer at Charity Water, which means I oversee all of our work in the field. And I've been at Charity Water for 9 years. We really scaled up over the course of the last decade or so. Founded 15 years ago. So I joined kind of as we were really scaling up. And really, my responsibility is about the work that we do in the field, the implementation of our programs across sub-Saharan Africa and Southeast Asia. The reason I came to Charity Water, the reason I was attracted to the organization and the mission and qualified to do it was because I'd spent 15 years prior working in really the same parts of the world, but in disaster response in the medical field. So my job then, I was working for an emergency response organization that was supporting hospitals and clinics in many of the same places that Charity Water works in Africa and Latin America and in Asia. And we would be working after hurricanes or in refugee situations or earthquakes to help the population stabilize from a health point of view and then rebuild the health infrastructure. And one of the things that I experienced and saw very clearly in this was sort of the revolving door that you'd find in the medical system of patients. People would get sick, they would go into the hospital or clinic at great expense to themselves and great expense to the system. They would get patched up, they would get sent back to their homes, and then they would be back with some other sickness not very long down the road. And you lose a lot of people in the process. I mean, the levels of mortality and morbidity are just shockingly high in the developing world compared to what you would find here in the United States where I live, for example. And so so many of these diseases have their root in waterborne diseases and have come from people drinking dirty water. So it's one of the leading causes of death in the world. And so it was the opportunity to come to Charity Water and actually focus on kind of one of the root causes of human suffering was really, really attractive to me.
When you first did you know a lot about, like, I guess you saw it firsthand of, the root cause of some of the stuff you were working on, but were you aware of, I guess, what causes that root cause, right? Whether it's just waste issues or just however it might be. Like, what did you learn, I guess, when you first thought about making the move?
It's interesting. I mean, there's a backstory behind the 15 years that I spent working in disaster response, which was the way that I grew up. I had a very unusual growing up experience. So my parents were Lutheran missionaries in West Africa. And I grew up until I was 8. I lived in a village in the Central African Republic that had no running water, no electricity. Then we moved to a fairly decent sized city in Nigeria. And I lived in Nigeria until I was 17. So I spent the first 17 years of my life living in an environment where clean water was a challenge for the majority of the population. It was certainly something we dealt with at home. We had to filter our water. My early memories as a child, my mother being very stressed out that I make sure you don't drink the water. If you go out with your friends and you get thirsty, make sure you come home and drink the water here. And just seeing how my friends and neighbors didn't have access to clean water like we did. So I grew up in an environment where I was experiencing this firsthand. My friends were living it, and that really equipped me and motivated me to a large degree to pursue the career that I did, get into humanitarian aid, get into the humanitarian aid sector, and has really helped me how to create solutions in very challenging situations. So yeah, it's been helpful to me to be able to come from that background.
When you talk about water, it's a huge topic. I guess where do we start as far as like you said, growing up, you do had access to, like, I don't know, I guess like a water filter or a well or something like that. Your neighbors didn't. At a foundational level, like, I guess what can be done at the base level at scale? And I guess what is Charity Water doing at a foundational level, like at scale? Is there like a step one that fits in every region, right? Every county you go to, there's like a certain protocol you follow.
I mean, water is life, right? Water touches every aspect of our lives. I mean, we are the blue planet, because we have water on the planet. You can think about water through a whole bunch of different lenses, and it really is so tied to, all human well-being, all human economies, all human development. So you can really look at it and become very overwhelming if you start to think about it in terms of water scarcity or water in climate change. You sort of need to figure out your niche in the world in terms of what you're gonna do. And Charity Water's niche is providing access to clean and safe drinking water to people who don't have access to it. So around the world, there's about 800 million people who live in settings where they don't have access to clean water. And what that means is they're drinking from surface water sources like ponds or rivers or streams. So that's like 1 in 9 people around the world. Like it's not a small,
right. It's crazy.
It's not a small problem. And yet it's inconceivable to those of us, to many of us who live in an environment where we've had running water for 100 years here.
Right.
So our niche has been, let's focus on the people who are the most needy, who are the most far behind. And within that, we really focus on rural communities. So really remote rural communities. And there's a couple of reasons for that. One is 8 out of 9 people who don't have access to clean water. So out of that 800 million people, 8 out of 9 of them live in rural areas.
Gotcha.
And, the solutions that you need for urban areas like big cities, those are big, like government projects where you need like literally hundreds of millions of dollars worth of investments. Those can be financed by the World Bank. Governments will fund them because there's concentrations of population and political pressure there. The rural areas, like nobody's helping them. There's such a huge disproportionate need there.
And when you go in and look at, let's say these rural areas, is it building, are we building wells? We see all these sort of
sometimes
life water filters where, it's a life straw, right? And you can just drink it out of the lake, which seems like an incredible invention. But like, is there certain things you go in and say, hey, we do this in almost every single area we go into?
So yes and no. I mean, the solutions need to be localized in order for them to be sustainable and really work, right? So they need to fit into the hydrogeological setting, the political setting, the social setting. And so the way we've attacked this, and the world is enormously diverse. So we're working in, the jungles of the Central African Republic. We're working high up in the mountains of Nepal. We're working in, Cambodia and the desert in Mali. So, you really need to take a local approach to it in order for it to work. I would say, from a technology point of view, most of the technologies that we're implementing in terms of water supply, so that would be how do you get the water out of the ground and how do you get it distributed and clean enough? Those are all actually really basic technologies. They are hand pumps. So an average project, we do a really wide range of projects, but an average project would be about $10,000. It'll serve 250 to 300 people. So imagine like a pretty remote village that's kind of by itself, far away from other people. And it'll be a borehole that goes down about 150 feet into the natural aquifer and with a hand pump. And you can crank that hand pump and get, absolutely pure and clean drinking water out of it. So that costs about $10,000 to kind of solve a problem at that level. And then, we do have some cases where, we're building in some places like $1 million pipe system that'll have, 50 kilometers of pipes and big water tanks and whatnot. But it just really depends on the geology and concentration of people and what the customs are in that area to get the right solution.
When you go to, maybe not you personally now, but like when the organization finds, I guess, new rural villages or you go into, I guess over a decade now, you sort of built a brand that's representative and trusted. So but when you go into one of these areas, do you still have to like introduce what you're doing, right? For back a little better term, like you going in and saying, hey, or obviously do they come out to you and say, hey, we need this, and the organizations you sort of in parallel with, you go in there and you sort of do this?
It's kind of a two-way street. The way we work is we're always working through local partners, and local partners would be local nonprofits that we identify. So we're out there and we find great organizations that we think are doing really impactful work, and then we work with them to like scale up and become much bigger. So we're financing them, project managing them, auditing them, capacity building with them. So really taking the experts on the ground who are from there and helping them 10x their impact. So from a starting point, you're going into a place where there's existing operating capacity, and there will be almost every community in the world, and no matter how remote they are, they know the value of clean water. So they've been to neighboring villages, they've been to the market town, and they know, like, oh man, like if we could only get clean water. So they know, they want it. What's interesting is that, our process in any given village it's almost a year-long process. But to build the infrastructure, like to actually build the well, drill it, or build the pipe system, or whatever, that might only be 2 or 3 weeks to actually like do the kind of the contractor work. But we're in the village for a whole year working on all of the behavior change and getting them to really optimize this as an asset that we're going to give them. So what I mean by that is there's a whole process where they're going to have to manage this. They're going to have to repair it. They're going to have to, it's going to cost a little bit of money. So we get them to elect a water committee. Usually it's 3 women and 3 men. They agree on a tariff system. So usually that's a contribution of about like 20 cents per family per month into the maintenance kitty. So that's a whole process. And then there's a whole process around getting them to build latrines, teaching them sanitation, safe water storage in their house so it doesn't get contaminated in the house. Because the reality is, I can give you all the clean water that you want, but if you don't wash your hands after you go to the bathroom, you're going to get sick.
Gotcha.
And that behavior change actually takes a lot longer than just building the infrastructure. So the gating factor is almost the human side versus the construction side, if you know what I mean.
I mean, Charity Water is still a pretty young organization if you look at the scale of it, right? I mean, it's maybe
so we're 15 years old. We did this was our 15th anniversary, and
great.
We founded just out of nowhere. Our founder is Scott Harrison. And woke up one morning, decided he was going to do it.
Crazy story, really cool story. But when you look at, let's say, those 15 years, I guess what has happened, right, as far as tangible impact or change, or what we can see? Like you said, we're not those of us who live in worlds where we have access to these type of things, we don't see it. But since obviously you're day to day in this, what has sort of the global impact been, right, and the change in these societies the last 15 years?
I mean, it's been amazing. Like we've given, in the last 15 years, we've given about 15 million people access to clean and safe drinking water. And we've scaled up as an organization. So now, we're this past year in 2021, we reached over 2 million people with clean and safe drinking water. So I think there's 2 ways to look at it, and kind of depending on whether I'm feeling like a glass half full kind of day or a glass half empty kind of day. At a global level, you're like, okay, well, 15 million people, like, compared to the 800 million people who don't have access to clean water, man, I wish we'd gone like so much faster. On the other hand, like 15 million people is a massive, massive number. And, when we have a long-term commitment to the communities that we're serving to make sure they're not just getting a well built and some training, in the first year, but that we're staying around in that area. We're following up with them. If they have problems, we're going to help them solve them for the long term. So we're able to go back and see communities that we helped get clean water 10 years ago. And you look at all the kids that are, 10 and under who've never had to struggle for water. They've never had to walk hours for water and skip school. They're not getting sick. That sort of foundational piece is just transformational for the communities, because what that means is instead of spending their time walking for water or their resources like on medicine or going to the clinic and losing time doing that, like they're able to work on their farms, start little businesses, send their kids to school. And that has this compounding effect, which is really, it's almost magical. We've got some really cool stories on our website. If you jump on charitywater.org and see it, we just went back to a community in Uganda that got helped. They got clean water 12 years ago. And it's just, it's just a miraculous process when people can get out of this terrible cycle of dirty water, they can really make progress.
We talked about this glaring 800 million number. Is it just money, right, to get to where you can scale from 15 million to 100 million, right? Is it money? Is it processes? Is it governments and institutions to be more invested in, rural areas? Because I always look at, rural individuals and citizens, even in America or Europe, with technology, it's like becoming so much smaller, right? They're going to affect economies more and more as technology embeds communities everywhere.
Right.
Then policymakers and politicians will then, have to cater to them and stuff like that. Is that just a matter of time before that 15 million gets to 100 million because everything else will sort of be much more fulfilled? And you'll have to have more sort of government insight or investments or institutions take notice to much more rural communities like they haven't before?
I think money's a big part of it. And there's a lot of progress that we could make today if we had more money. I don't think money's going to solve 100% of the problem, because ultimately then you get into, as you said, policy and politics. And you see that even in incredibly wealthy countries like the United States or, in Europe, have, disparities and income injustices where, you do have people living in very wealthy countries who are in very poor conditions for some reason. There are people in the United States who don't have access to clean water.
Yeah.
You go in the South or, on some of the Native American reservations, you can find conditions like you would find in Africa in my country. It's definitely not a question of lack of resources. There's something else that's broken here. But I think that we can get so much further with resources. And then it's that last sort of 2%, 5% of fixing the world's problems that gets really, really complicated, But there's a lot of simple stuff we could do today, which is like, which is the frustrating part, because we could go, we really could go so much faster if we had more resources. I could probably put twice as much money to work in the field this year as I'm going to have. And we're going to reach a couple million people this year, but I could probably, just with the existing infrastructure, partners, drilling rigs that we currently have, if I just doubled it, I could do twice as much. So overnight, if somebody came in and wrote us $100 million check, we could probably put it to work, like no sweat. For bigger amounts of money, we could put it to work, over the course of the next 5 years and really accelerate it. So I think, listen, in my line of work, you got to be optimistic to keep coming back. I've been at this for, over 20 years and seen a lot of tough stuff. I'm also just so encouraged and inspired by the progress that I do see. So I know, listen, we are going to reach everybody on the planet and give everybody access to clean water at some point. I think it's in my lifetime. I'm really convinced. But it's a race against time, because every day longer that it takes, that's days that kids are dying or people are suffering. And so, some of these things are just they are a question of time, but time means lives, A
couple questions around sort of, nonprofits in water, right? Like, you're not the only one doing really good work. It seems like there are really actually a lot of really interesting, water nonprofits doing work everywhere.
Yep.
Are you in contact with them? Do y'all work together and things like that? Is it just very like, hey, you do work, we do ours. As long as you don't come to our areas, like, we're okay. Like, I'm always interested to understand, like, when you're talking scale like this, right, and a massive problem like this, like, you as an organization are not going to solve it yourself, right? Is there collaboration amongst other people trying to do the same things?
There's a lot of collaboration, and our DNA and our operating model is to accomplish our mission through partnerships with other organizations that are specializing.
Gotcha.
So we are working with almost all of the leading organizations that would be focused on our sector, which is providing access to clean water to people in the developing world. If you zoom out at a global level, there's all sorts of great organizations working on water that we don't have any operating overlap with, but in our sector, we would collaborate a lot, and then figure out, like, just sort of who's adding value at different times. So we might be really good at fundraising in a particular case, and your organization might be really good, have a really strong implementation team on the ground. And so we'll kind of divvy up responsibilities. So I think there is a lot of collaboration there, definitely a lot more than you would glean from looking at people's, marketing or branding or whatever.
Sure. No, that's great.
We're definitely the largest water-focused charity in the United States. In the UK, there's a very large organization called WaterAid, another very big player. But you're right, there's a lot of great organizations, and then there's a lot of great organizations that are local also. So you won't hear about them internationally, but like on the ground, they're just like, they're big and they're awesome, and they're just inspiring people to work with.
You mentioned the water aquifers before. You also mentioned like sub-Saharan Africa and some places where maybe water is not as abundant, right? So how do you get water where it doesn't rain that much, right? Or they don't
Mhm.
have sort of natural water aquifers like some other parts of the world.
Yeah, and that's a valid point. So we do a lot of rainwater harvesting,
Okay.
and the example I can give you is there's an area that we work in India, in Rajasthan. It's called the Thar Desert, and it's, you know, one of the hottest places on earth. People live like literally in the sand, and the water is very, very deep. It's too deep to drill for. When you get the water from underground, it tends to be very salty, so people don't like the
Hmm.
taste of it. So
Hmm.
historically, for centuries, they've done rainwater harvesting there, and the way that people have done it have been they just dig a big pit in the ground, they kind of cover it with some branches, and the monsoon season comes through for about four months out of the year, and then it doesn't rain for 7 months out of the year. So they would collect a bunch of water in there, and hope that would hold them through the dry season. So that sort of basic technology has gotten upgraded, and now they're like underground cisterns. It's a 10 or 15,000 liter cistern that's, you know, imagine 10 feet deep, and a big earthen pan, like let's say half the size of a tennis court. And in the middle it drains down into this huge underground cistern, and that'll serve a family. It costs about $600 to build, and it gives them enough water to
Hmm.
survive the entire dry season, because underground water just isn't realistic there. So, you know, we're looking at those kinds of solutions, which are rooted in history and tradition and have been there for centuries, but then are upgraded to, you know, using contemporary building technology to make them, you know, cost efficient and really work well. And they're, you know, it's amazing. Like the water is absolutely pure
Yeah.
and lasts all season.
That was actually my next question was when you look at, again, I don't know what it's like internally, if you get technology companies like pitching you or you going to certain technology companies and looking at like, is there technology that can help you as an organization, right? Maybe do your job much better, right? More efficiently.
Mm-hmm.
If there's
Yep.
some type of, you might see it more than I do, but is there anything technology wise that is happening where it could make, you know, water for those 800 million people easier to access?
So in terms of the water access, which is, you know, water extraction, so how do you get it out of the ground,
Hmm.
or how do you
Hmm.
capture a spring, and then distribution? It's actually pretty simple. You know, I mean, the Romans were doing this 2,000 years
Right.
ago.
Right.
You know, 100 years ago, we figured out how to, you know, do a little bit of chlorine dosing in water to make residual
Hmm.
chlorine and kill the bugs. You know, like, so the principles are, you know, they focus on gravity, and you know, some basic ideas around some basic technology around, you know, making sure that the water's clean and safe. That really serves, I'm making up a number here, but, you know, so say 90% of the need, right, in the
Right.
world, like,
Yeah.
it needs just a basic solution. You know, your more exotic, expensive, difficult to manage things like reverse osmosis, desalination plants are currently really, really expensive and
Hmm.
really
Hmm.
difficult to operate. And, you know, you'll find those in the Middle East, you'll find them in
Right.
California, but they're just cost prohibitive right now for the kinds of places that we're
Sure.
working in, both from a financial point of view, but also from an operating, you know, just the operating requirements of it. So we've tended to look for just existing technologies, like what's working really well, and let's execute that at scale and really well. Where we are using technology, cutting edge technology, is more in the operations and maintenance. So how do
Yep.
you monitor these things? So
Right.
you know, we got a big grant from Google to develop a remote sensor that can retrofit on wells and transmit the data up to the cloud, so that if there's a breakdown, like the mechanics in the town know immediately. So
Huh.
like
Yeah.
that takes, you know, a dumb pump, which is a hand pump, you know, which honestly is a technology which is decades and decades
Right.
old.
Right.
And then it becomes a connected device. It's connected to the internet, and it can be really transformational, even though that, you know, the pump itself is not anything revolutionary.
Interesting. Well, I want to kind of end on a couple things. Two bigger questions. One would be obviously COVID and how that sort of affected, you know, boots on the ground, the organizations trying to, you know, deliver these projects and build these wells or whatever type of system that you do in whatever region it is. What has the last, you know, 2 years been like, you know, for you and the organization in these projects? Has things
Yeah.
stalled? Have things, you know, obviously across the supply chain of all kind of things, it has suffered. But what's it been like for you guys?
Well, yeah, it's been tough. Our partners in the field and the teams out there have just been, absolutely heroic. The long and short of it is they, like many of us, have figured out how to operate in this
Right.
crazy environment. And so today, we do see some bumps in the road, some delays because of the supply chain. We do see some national lockdowns slowing things down, or we see teams getting sick and quarantining. Just the same as we're seeing around, here in the States or with our neighbors and friends. So, but last year was really, I think, different. First of all, in the environments that we work in, clean water was actually the number one defense against the spread of COVID. So, the strategy here in the United States was keep people out of the hospitals so that we have enough hospital beds to deal with the most, so they were like, lower the curve was the strategy here. But, in many of these environments that we're working in sub-Saharan Africa or Asia, like there is no good healthcare system. There are no hospitals to lower the curve on. So like there's just no ICU beds there. So only thing you can do is to prevent it. And the main way you prevent that is through good hygiene, like wash your hands. You need water to do that. And through public health education around like stay socially distanced, don't go to school, or, whatever it is. And because of our programs, if you remember what I was saying about like sort of the year-long process of working with the communities around behavior change, to wash your hands after going to the bathroom, safe storage, all of that public health messaging was there. We knew how to do, radio PSAs. We knew how to get out to communities and talk to them about this. We knew how to like really help with that. And so our partners last year really shifted a lot of their focus into sort of COVID prevention activities while they were doing, the best they could to implement the projects. So they were doing that kind of like as an emergency response thing. And now this year, all that's been like incorporated and kind of mainstreamed into just like the way that they do business now has a huge like sort of COVID prevention component to it. So we're really encouraged that, the access to vaccines is increasing a lot around the world. It still has a long ways to go, but, more and more people in the places that we're working in are finally getting access to vaccine and protected against COVID. With all of its ups and downs, the people around the world have been resilient and stepped up and done their jobs, and it's been humbling.
I don't know how to really ask this, but like, was there a sort of, not calm is a bad word, but like preparedness, maybe unlike, America or like Canada or Europe, because a lot of these countries kind of deal with diseases quite often, right? And sort of outbreaks and just disease at scale. It seems like they deal with it quite often. Yeah.
The example that I saw was, if you recall, 7 years or so ago, there were some big Ebola outbreaks in Liberia and Sierra Leone. And that triggered a massive like public health response across all of Africa. So if you were traveling in Africa, I mean, you'd be on the other side of the continent, they would have public health officials at the airport, they would be taking your temperature, there would be educational signs, there would be hand washing stations at every sort of public area. You go to a bus station or an office, there'd be a hand washing station with like chlorine. I think there was a different level of experience, in the States.
Sure.
We never experienced this kind of thing.
Right.
And so people didn't know what to do. People didn't know who to trust. And I think in that sense, there was a higher level of preparedness, sadly and ironically, in some of the developing world than there was here. And luckily, the numbers have been reasonable so far. We just hope it continues that way.
So I'll end on a question a little bit about the future. And I know we kind of talk about, the first 15 years of the organization, but if you look at the next decade, what does success look like for you and the organization? Success is so hard to gauge, and I know internally you probably look at metrics and certain things you guys want to hit, but just from like maybe an emotional standpoint, at a human level, like what are some of the successes and goals you hope to see perhaps over the next decade?
Our most important indicator, the one that matters the most and the one that only matters at the end of the day, is how many people we serve, how many people we're able to help get access to clean and safe drinking water. And that's really a direct function of how much money we're able to raise. We have an amazing group of donors who specifically choose to pay for all of our operating expenses. So like my salary and trips to the field and audits. So there's about 130 individuals or families who would say, I don't want my money to go to the field. I want my money to just pay for all of the, Charity Water's operating
The
expenses.
operations, yeah.
So 100% of the public's money goes to the field, and that money really is touching lives and making a difference out there.
And real quick, that was kind of an innovative model.
It was a
right when
really
came
innovative
out.
model.
Like, that was kind of unheard of a little bit.
And it's not easy, we never ever take it for granted, because to find people who kind of buy into the mission and the vision with us, and who are ready to like kind of come on board as team members, as kind of like investors in the organization, helping us build this movement. It's hard to find those people, and it's an amazing thing that they do for all of the rest of us who donate, and then have this sort of pure play of like, I don't have to worry about where my money's going or not going. Like, I know exactly where my money's going. So that's pretty unique. Our goal for our high level goal is just to grow as much as we can. Like we know how to help people. We've got a great mechanism. We could do so much more. But concretely, what we're trying to do over the course of the next 5 years is to reach the next 15 million people. So it's taken us 15 years to reach 15 million people. We're going to try to do that same amount in a third of the time. So go 3 times as fast. And that's going to take some real creative thinking. I mean, one of the things that I like the most about my job and love about Charity Water is just like, it is the continual startup model. I mean, today feels like day one, every day.
That is, I could
so there are definitely some days where I wish I could step off the gas, but that's what my teammates, come in and they push forward for a little while, and then I get my breath back and we move forward. But it's an exciting way to work, which is just like, how do I give it like 100% every day and try to just grow for the good of humanity, in a way that really is sustainable and makes sense, not just for growth's sake.
I'd like to piggyback off that real quick. I love the idea, because I always look at, business can scale really well. And I talk to a lot of people using business, to solve societal issues, right? Because business can scale much faster than nonprofits. Traditionally, that has been like a real issue, I feel, from a nonprofit perspective. It's just very hard to scale.
Yeah.
Do you think that's like an organizational, philosophy? Is that something that can be taught or sort of implemented into other organizations within other sectors, whether it's food, education, whatever it may be? The idea of like looking at nonprofits and scaling like business, having that same mentality, feels like we can get a lot more stuff done. Like you said, it took us 15 years to get 15. We want to do that. We want to do that in 5 now, right? That's incredible. Like, is there advice or tips that you would give other sort of nonprofit executives or leaders about having that mentality, or what they can do to do that?
Oh, it's so hard. It's so hard.
Yeah, I know. It's so hard.
It's just not just nonprofits. If you look at any business segment in the United States, take New York City, 99% of all the businesses in New York City have less than 50 employees. So, the world is anybody getting to scale, regardless of whether you're a tech company or a car dealership or a, dry cleaner, like getting to scale is really, really hard. And I think, it does have a lot to do with a leader setting the pace and saying like, we're gonna get there, and really, let's just like never giving up. And that's, it's one of the fun things about working with Scott is he's just absolutely relentless. And as soon as we hit one milestone, that is like so far in the rearview mirror, we're already looking for the next one. And so I think, ultimately, when you look at organizations at scale, leadership plays just such an enormous role in setting a vision, getting people to come along with you on that vision, and getting the buy-in, and just believing in stuff that you shouldn't necessarily believe in, because it's sort of incredible, So what we've learned is, if we set high goals, we will achieve them. And even if we don't achieve them, we're going to get close and we'll achieve them next year. So there's something about setting goals which are a little audacious, and you'll get there in time. It's one of the things I've learned from Scott. It's more important that we get there than how fast we get there, but we're going to try to get there as fast as we can. Love
it. Well, thank you so much, Christoph. This was a great conversation. Amazing to get your thoughts and perspective on, the sort of state of water right now. And, it's such a brick by brick process, right? Like, I mean, anything else to get water to 800 million, clean water to 800 million people is going to take a very, very long time, and especially to do it the right way.
Yeah.
We're talking about scale, but you have to scale appropriately and scale correctly. That's even, harder.
Yeah.
So best of luck to you and the team, and keep up the great work.
Great. Thanks so much, Grant. Thanks for having me on.